we have a significant labor bottleneck. A lot of these people who would be building homes are actually coming from different countries. A lot of the Canadians who are building homes are now retiring. This is skilled labor. And so we are apparently 1 million construction workers short as a country to be able to achieve anywhere.
Welcome to The Flow, Real Estate and Money Show, a show focused on helping Canadians understand the different elements of real estate, mortgage, and finance. The goal of our show is to provide Canadians with the tools, information, and knowledge to have more success when it comes to their investing and real estate related decisions going forward. My name is Alex McFadyen, and I'm your host. I can't wait to get you into the flow.
We all know that Mark Carney is now the Prime Minister of Canada. He's promising to build 500,000 homes a year and fix the housing crisis that has persisted for over 10 years under the charge of the Liberal government. Well, let's pause here for a quick second. Is this just another lofty promise from the Liberal government, or are we finally seeing an actual plan that can work? I'm going to go deep into what Carney's actually proposing with his plan based on what we know since he's been elected and what he's promised before, plus the history of the Liberal government and what they've done since they've been in power. The data says that it's not likely he's going to be able to solve this ongoing housing crisis, but should we give him a chance? What do you think? Let's start with the most important, impactful thing from Carney. The fact is, he's suggesting that he's going to be able to build 500,000 homes a year, more than anyone else in the past 10 years, and that's a very lofty goal. If you can recall, CMHC did a study that said that Canadians need at least 6 million homes by 2030 to restore affordability. Halfway through 2025, we are nowhere near that track record at this point right now. Carney's plan suggests that he's going to double construction to 500,000 homes a year, with our current average being around 240,000 homes. Now, we'll get into the specifics of how he says he's going to build those homes, but let's talk a little bit about a reality check around this fact itself. Now, economist Toon Nguyen says it's an ambitious, but not impossible, but not easy goal. And I think the reason that he's suggesting that is that he never said specifically what kinds of homes he was going to build or where they were going to be built, just that homes were going to be built more than anything else. Why we're behind? Well, Canada has underbuilt for 2 decades. While population has completely exploded in the last 6 or 7 years, we've been underbuilding since 2011 or 2012. So it's not like it's only been the last 10 years, but the reality is opening up the doors to a significant amount of people coming to our country has significantly changed the need for housing and the type of housing, notwithstanding all the people that are growing up in our country and the people who literally just are living longer than ever before. Basically, in short, we welcomed 1 million newcomers in 2023, and there was no chance that we had anywhere near that amount of housing. The fact that we've been building no more than 240,000 homes a year and we brought in 1 million newcomers, obviously the math just doesn't math. And those are 2 separate problems that we're talking about right here. One where it's the amount of supply required, which is house building, but then it's also the amount of demand coming in with 1 million. And now the government has suggested that it's going to reduce the capacity of the amount of people coming to our country. Carney has also suggested that they're going to keep the limitation to 5% of the population of people coming into our country being newcomers. And that is still a very, very significant number. In fact, I'm not sure exactly how they're getting to 5%, but regardless, that's more than we've seen happen on the average of the last 10 years. So it looks like we're not going to see a significant drop in the amount of people coming to our actual country. So the question is it even physically or logistically possible to double the amount of housing starts? And if it's not, why even bother promising at this point right now? Now, the government's big play at this point right now is, let's talk about exactly what this is, like how they're going to build these homes and what actually they're suggesting they're going to do. And the government's suggesting essentially a new crown corporation acting like a national housing charter with a suggestion of offering $25 billion in low-cost loans, $1 billion in equity for prefabricated construction, and $10 billion for affordable housing. Now, they're modeling this based on the Wartime Housing Canada Act, which built prefab homes in post-war World War II. Now, there's some serious problems associated with this particular idea and this plan as a whole, but let's get into it. First of all, the experts who are talking about this are suggesting that it could take years to establish this crown corporation. CMHC had 96 local offices with teams in the 1950s. That was previous. Now, we know that technology is far ahead. We've got the internet. We have access to remote work. We don't need all that. But let's be honest here. This is the government we're talking about. And there is no easy way to do anything with the bureaucracy around every single step of the way. The idea of them getting efficient to be able to solve this in a quicker fashion is laughable at best. And that's with any government, to be honest with you, whether it's liberals or otherwise. Now, reading through some of the notes from some of the experts and pundits who are talking about this plan of building 500,000 homes in the next year, they suggest first of all, you can't just replicate that overnight. That's from Steve Pomeroy. And the question here would be, will Ottawa actually build or just fund? The bureaucracies themselves are very slow. And obviously, as we know, they're very prone to bottlenecks. Now, there is an argument that the private sector won't be able to build enough affordable units on its own. So developers having the desire to build affordable housing units is going to be limited based on the cost of money and or where they're getting access to this land or how the government is funding it for them to be able to do it privately. And the question around modular housing does reduce the amount of skilled workers required, which means it could be more scalable, especially in a labor shortage. But then it asks a whole bunch of other questions. One would be, specifically speaking, labor around modular housing. Modular housing, generally speaking, is not financed through conventional means with typical banks. So, are we going to see the banks and CMHC take a different approach around manufactured homes and modular housing? And in addition to that, where is the land coming from and what is the cost associated with that? Where are these manufactured homes being actually put? Ultimately, there's so many questions that are not being answered around this. I'm just genuinely speaking curious to hear what the plan is. But my biggest concern from a mortgage perspective would be, who's financing these properties? And if we're financing low cost properties, where again are they located? In 2016, OSFI changed the guidelines and the benchmark around manufactured homes. They no longer were able to qualify them based on CMHC high ratio mortgages. And from that point on, very limited and very few lenders were willing to finance these properties. So, what is going to change about that in 2026? The point of discussion or the question here is, can the government be an efficient builder in the 2020s like they were in the 1950s? Or are we setting ourselves up for another Phoenix Pay System 2.0? If y'all don't know about that, that was a massive, massive multi-year lawsuit associated with the payroll system made by Phoenix, which ended up costing millions of dollars, millions on millions and millions and millions of dollars because they couldn't get this technology in place and ultimately ended up being a massive fail. So, what about some of the other ideas that the government has right now or suggested? Now, first of all, the GST cut for home builders and specifically new builds. Let's talk about specifically what that is and what that can mean. So, the Liberals proposed that there were going to be a GST cut on new builds for under $1 million. But here's the catch: this is only for first-time home buyers. In addition to that, they suggest they would reduce the GST for homes up to 1.5 million, again, for first-time home buyers. The reality of this specific idea is that it's quick to implement. It can happen right away. It just needs a rubber stamp and need to actually do it and figure out a way to deal with this from a government perspective down to the builders. But the reality of this type of a program is that it's only impactful for first-time home buyers. Now, if you don't know, we have a GST credit, which is long overdue from being updated and fixed right now on brand new homes. I think it's only good up to about $350,000 or $400,000. So virtually nobody inside of BC or Ontario has been able to use this new GST credit. And obviously, it's not very impactful as it relates to being able to purchase something that would be good for a family. So the reality of this type of a GST credit is that it's mostly targeted towards families in the Greater Vancouver and the Greater Ontario area, with some obviously in the Calgary area and a few other areas of the country. But is it notable? I mean, the reality is this is basically a drop in the bucket. It could be positive as it relates to housing prices for first-time homebuyers and getting to the marketplace. Instead of being $1,050,000, now it's $1 million on the dot. But the real question is, new builds are already high priced and they're increasing in price as time goes on because they're projecting against the future price point. Who is this really helping other than the developer market, where new home buyers are expected to quote unquote swallow up all these extra new builds in places like Toronto or Ontario? The reality is, if you think about a GST credit as it relates to this type of a purchase, yes, it can be beneficial. Yes, there are some merits, and yes, it can go into effect quickly, but it doesn't help most people get into the marketplace, and it just doesn't help the average Canadian make that upsize from a one-bedroom condo into that next property because they're no longer a first-time buyer. Obviously, it doesn't help renters get into the marketplace, and it doesn't apply to the resale market, which is where most Canadians shop anyways. So from a developer perspective, I've spoken to a few different developers and they say it's barely a drop in the bucket. It's not going to have a meaningful difference, with the exception of some entry-level price point properties and moving some properties that are currently stale in the marketplace. The question or the thought process around this is just another one of those plays that we're probably not going to turn into anything significant, and it's not really any meaningful affordability measure or any major tax break. It's basically realistically a tax break for developers, which is dressed up as a policy, and it will hardly even help them. Why don't we just think about making a change here and actually making this relevant for all Canadians purchasing homes for owner occupied properties and keep it as simple as that? What are the other realities of this program? Now, Carney is also suggesting some mortgage reform. And again, who on earth is he talking to when he's making these decisions and recommendation? Like, really? They're suggesting more options, but will it really matter? So, here are some of the things that they're suggesting. Number one, they're going to review the mortgage system to allow for longer fixed rate terms. The current market normally sees a maximum of 5-year fix, and 10-year terms are rare and underused. Let's talk about that for a second. First of all, there are a lot of reasons that Canadians don't have access to the 15, 25, and 30-year mortgages like we see in the United States. Notwithstanding anything else, it is very heavily attributed to those who are actually providing the money and how our money is securitized in our country. If we were to go and offer 10, 15, 25, 30-year terms, it would significantly increase the cost of money to Canadians, which I also don't think would help from affordability perspective. The second thing is, if they're going to look at any issues around these longer terms, they should start around things like the prepayment penalties. Most Canadians don't take a fixed rate 10-year term because, well, the rates are nearly 1% higher and the prepayment penalties are through the freaking roof. If you leave this thing in 10 years, you are paying your arm, your leg, your child, your dog, everything to get out of these things. So why would a Canadian take the risk on a 10-year term knowing that is the case? In the United States, they pay points or fees on the front end when they're getting into their terms, which means when they're exiting a term, they can refinance with no fees or no penalties. With most Canadians tapping into their equity for a refinance to consolidate debt, to reset payments, to invest, why on earth would they want to take a 10-year term when they could pay a $40,000 penalty on a $400,000 loan just to leave before the end of the term? It makes no sense. And unless they're going to come in and offer some kind of recommendations around reductions in penalties and actually putting something in place to help Canadians there, then there really isn't even a leg to stand on. And this is something that probably will barely even be another drop in the bucket as far as I'm concerned. Well, what are some of the pros of this? If they were able to actually spend the time to look at this type of a policy and fix it and suggest that, okay, well, why don't we deal with some of these penalty considerations? Why don't we deal with how the money is securitized? Why don't we invest into figuring out ways to get more banks and lenders offering competitive 10-year terms? Well, it could provide a little bit more stability for homeowners, especially during rate hike cycles, which hopefully would be less frequent if we had a government policy which was taking care of the amount of fiscal debt that we're dealing with on an annual and semi-annual basis. The other thing is that it could encourage planning over speculative buying in the marketplace. But again, this comes down to the prepayment penalty. Consumer demand hasn't existed for longer term. So why would supply or will supply even create the demand? And if it does, who's actually looking out for the consumer as it relates to advocacy? Just take a minute and Google up mortgage prepayment penalties, and any bank, and although they've paid to have these taken off the internet, they pop up every now and then because you've got people trying to sue the banks to get that money back from these prepayment penalties. So is changing mortgage terms a real game changer or a distraction from the bigger supply issue? I would say the latter in this case, unless they seriously look at how they're securitizing the money and make some significant changes to that, which is unlikely to happen. Just scanning forward here, I'm just thinking about some of my notes here as to the housing plan. One of the biggest issues as it relates to housing is the amount of people who are available to actually build these properties. So we have a significant labor bottleneck, and we know that a lot of these people who would be building homes are actually coming from different countries. A lot of the Canadians who are building homes or were home builders are now retiring or going through that process, or they were immigrants who have decided to leave the country. This is skilled labor. This is one of the key things that we need to be bringing into our country. And so we are apparently 1 million construction workers short as a country to be able to achieve anywhere near the goals that we're looking to achieve here. The immigration cuts that are proposed would hurt the supply of tradespeople. The trades themselves aren't really prioritized in immigration scoring. So, are they going to change the immigration score to prioritize perhaps trades as part of this picture? I mean, that seems like a common sense consideration. And the reality is that COVID and that experience led to a lot of pent up demand in that marketplace. And now the workforce that we have right now just simply can't even keep up with what's going on. So I believe that this is where the prefab market enters the picture again, because it's less on-site labor, workers are inside, it's safer, it's more efficient, it's obviously a little bit less to the elements, and just like an auto factory installing a window, they can pass it down the line. But the big question, realistic, that we should be asking from this is, do we rewire the immigration policy around construction, or do we double down on prefab? Unless they're going to make some significant changes to the lending market, which will continue to be the big question around all this is finance, then obviously it seems like we should focus our energy towards immigrating and bringing the right people to our country who are going to contribute in the way that needs to be contributed. Now, continuing on the housing policy question, the big question is realistically, and this is actually something I put up a poll about on my Instagram just the other day around, what do you think it's going to take for us to break through the housing market? One of the key parts of the plan was that they were suggesting that the cities are a big reason why people are not able to build, and developers are not able to build, and home builders are not able to build. I spoke to a few different builders, and they suggested that the red tape and the cost associated with building is so high right now that it is one of the big reasons that they're not able to grow and build as much as they can. Now, part of the plan from the Liberal government is to extend the Housing Accelerator Fund, which will have some form of progress tracking to see if it will work. They plan on offering pre approved home designs for row homes, fourplexes, and ADUs. We'll see if those are popular. They don't look too pretty from the outside so far. And their suggestion is that they're going to cut those development fees in half for multi unit projects for 5 years. Now, that doesn't really help the types of homes that most Canadians actually need, which is single family homes or these townhomes or row homes. But if unless they're considering townhomes and row homes the homes that Canadians need and want, again, it doesn't really help out single family homes, which has been a primary issue. The reality is the big challenge that we're dealing with here is that municipalities actually control the zoning, not Ottawa. So they're going to have to fight a battle with virtually every municipality to get them to cut their fees. And then where is the rest of their money going to come from is going to be the next question. There is going to be a significant amount of political resistance to this. And there's just not an easy strategy other than finding a way to fund the difference in cost to reduce the expenses for developers to be able to develop for consumers at a reasonable cost. So the reality is that even with money on the table, cities like Vancouver and Toronto have continued to resist zoning changes. And it's probable that federal money is just not going to be enough to overcome any local NIMBYism and bureaucracy. So, with all these different ideas aside, the question mark that really people are asking is, what could actually go wrong with all of these different ideas? I think I've already kind of preset the stage here based on a number of these ideas that we've heard from, but let's talk about them. I mean, number one, the Crown Agency. That if they have trouble getting this Crown Agency to get houses built, then we could see no shovels in the ground for 2 to 3 years, which puts us way behind the 8 ball. And it's very easy to suggest that by 2 to 3 years, we could see a different government in power. We've got significant labor shortages, and they're looking to get worse unless they significantly change and overhaul the immigration policy, which would mean more people with trades coming into our country. GST right now cut, it could just inflate the prices on new developments, especially if supply does not ramp up enough. And what it's looking like right now is that although we have a supply glut, most cities are suggesting, based on the developments and the permits going in the ground right now, that in 2 to 4 years, we could see a significant reduction in supply all over again if this is not fixed very soon. We could also see cities just stall on zoning despite the federal incentives. It's one thing to promise 500,000 homes, but it's another to actually lay a foundation. This plan has I have to say there is some potential if this plan is done correctly. It's just that there are so many barriers in place that don't seem clearly thought through, particularly as it relates to the financing side of things. There's so much more risk than the government is willing to admit, and my concern is that we look at the next 5 years as a repetition of the last 10 years, even if we're in the right mindset of continuing and promoting some success as it relates to the housing policy. So Carney's plan is comprehensive, it's ambitious, and there are some technically sound points, as much as I don't really care for a lot of it, but it's logistically strained. There is the success in this actual plan is based on the speed of this rollout, this Crown Corporation, labor market adapting and changing the immigration guidelines, provincial and municipal cooperation, and scaling prefab deployment Not only that, but financing and banks being on the same page as it relates to financing these prefabs and these 10-year terms in a way that consumers actually are interested. So here's my question. Is this the plan that Canada has been waiting for, or the next big liberal promise that breaks under its own absolute ambition? I would say that Carney has a plan. He currently has Parliament, but now he needs time. And time is the one thing that Canadian market just simply doesn't have. If you found this helpful, hit subscribe and follow for more breakdowns. And tell me, what is the one thing that you think would fix the Canadian housing crisis that we face right now? If you're listening to this on the podcast, please rate this podcast on Spotify or iTunes and send it out to someone else that you would think would be of value. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
That was an unreal episode of The Flow. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.